Hello, I'm Dr. Donald Lloyd-Jones, President of the American Heart Association, and I'm delighted to join you today as we celebrate the Google Has Heart 5K. The American Heart Association, which was founded in 1924, is a major public health organization promoting heart health throughout the population. Since 1924, the American Heart Association has funded almost $5 billion in cardiovascular research focused on making all of our lives healthier and helping us all live healthier longer. Events like the Google Has Heart 5K are major ways in which we can support the mission of the American Heart Association, and I'm delighted today to be joined by two of your fellow employees, Mr. Peter Quimby and Ms. Amy Waldron. Peter and Amy, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So both of their stories, as you'll hear today, deal with heart issues and end with the incredible journey of a heart transplant. Peter, if it's okay, maybe I'll start with you. Tell us what life was like before you developed your heart issues and when you first noticed that something was wrong.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, life was really good. I graduated from West Point. I was in the Army. I served my 5 years, and after I got out, I was waiting for my exit physical, and I noticed some abnormal beats in my heart, which kind of made me feel uncomfortable. And my exit physical, they referred me to cardiology, to the advanced cardiology team at the VA for some additional work, a stress test and an echocardiogram. And it was there I learned that I had dilated cardiomyopathy and learned that I was going to be on this path, likely someday needing some advanced therapies and ultimately probably a heart transplant. I lived with that for about 10 years until I got sick.
Peter, what is a dilated cardiomyopathy, and does this run in your family?
Dilated cardiomyopathy basically means the left ventricle of the heart, the main pumping chamber, somehow gets compromised or weakened, which progresses and leads to heart failure. So the heart can't pump sufficient blood to the body, and it sort of causes a cascade of adverse events that leads to congestive heart failure. When I was initially diagnosed, it was idiopathic. It was of unknown origin. But we later learned that my father also had dilated cardiomyopathy, and my daughter, through genetic testing and research, we've also learned has the gene that predisposes her for that. So it's now familial dilated cardiomyopathy.
Peter, I'm a cardiologist, and I try to explain these things to patients every day. And you just gave a better definition of dilated cardiomyopathy and really a better sense of what this means for families than I ever could have done. So well done you. But obviously, you've lived this very personally. What was your journey before the heart transplant? What sort of medications did you need? What sort of therapies did you need to get you ready or to get you to bridge to the transplant?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, right? For patients and all patients that go through heart failure, you learn that every patient follows the same protocol. I think it comes out of England. You're on, an ACE inhibitor and a beta blocker, right? You're basically treated pharmacologically. Oftentimes you'll end up with an ICD, which is an implantable defibrillator in your chest, because sometimes you have rhythm disturbances. You basically see a cardiologist twice a year. They ask you a whole bunch of questions like how many pillows do you sleep with, and it's treated symptomatically, which means regardless of what your medical tests say, how does it affect the quality of your life? And then you get graded on some scale, the New York State, heart failure system. And what's interesting about heart disease is it's one of these things where we don't want to take, or currently the standard of care is we don't do advanced interventions until you've gotten too sick, which is sort of diametrically opposed to the way we think about everything else. And so I lived in fear of this emotionally and physically. It was, I was getting weaker and weaker. And it's, when you look at it as a function of time, it's hard to say. Somebody asks you, how do you feel today? Well, I feel good. How do you know? Well, I feel the same way I did yesterday, so I feel good. But as a function of time, you're compromising with yourself because your health is getting poorer and poorer, and you start to rationalize and deal with all those things, which is why, as a patient who has a chronic condition like this, the mental health evaluation of a patient and creating a support system around the patient is frankly just as important as what the docs do. And then the docs will tell you that their job really starts after transplant, right? Because it's about keeping me healthy as the patient after that. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an incredible journey, and so many things that you touched on there. I want to pick up the threads on. we as doctors often think about the statistics and what are the numbers, what medications are needed to correct the numbers, but really this comes down to living your life as a patient every single day and maximizing that quality of life, as you said, minimizing the symptoms. Heart failure really is a disease that we manage through understanding the symptoms the patients are experiencing and trying to optimize those numbers so that we avoid any complications. So your personal description of that journey, I think, is really important for people to understand that it's not just tweaking numbers. It really is trying to maximize along the way the quality of life. And then, as you said, using medications. And by the way, a lot of those medications were discovered or proven to be effective through research that the American Heart Association has funded. But we're using these things in a stepwise approach. We don't roll out the huge guns until we need them. But when we need them, we've got them. And again, we've got them because of decades of really wonderful scientific research that have shown us what works for patients in different stages of this process. So just before the transplant, as obviously, the medications start to become less effective sometimes over time. What happened next and what led to the decision to go ahead with the transplant?
Yeah. So again, just to pull the thread and, maybe to connect, Amy's experience to mine, right? When you're a young patient going through heart failure, there is not a lot of information that's available to you, and trying to find other young transplant patients or heart failure patients and understand what their quality of life was like, because heart disease is often viewed as a disease of excess and aging. And so when you're young and healthy and you don't really have any predisposition for that, you don't know what to expect. So my honesty with my doctors is a super important part for them to be able to treat me. And I was so afraid, and I wasn't, emotionally in a place where, I was rationalizing, right? So I had an exam, I think in February at the VA, and they told me that my EF, or ejection fraction, which is basically the ratio of the max chamber volume over the minimum chamber volume when your heart pumps, right? They had told me, which is 20. So I was, pretty far down the path into heart failure, but I was asymptomatic. I was fine. Fast forward about a month and a half, when I had my crash event and I went to the hospital, my ejection fraction was 5 and they could barely detect it. My blood pressure was 50/30. My total cholesterol was like 45. I had been sitting on a couch for 2 weeks, basically not eating and vomiting. And I got to the hospital and they shipped me from one hospital to another hospital. I got a balloon pump, which nobody at 37 years old gets a balloon pump. And so I got met at the hospital, and I got met by a priest and a bunch of doctors, and I was told I wasn't going to live through the night. And that's really where you see the miracle of modern medicine. It was a scene from Choose Your, TV medical drama. I had doctors and nurses on top of me. I had IVs and anatomy. I had the whole, I had the surgical team, right? And like literally watching these world famous cardiologists and surgeons go back and forth and talk about how do they titrate meds and what's the most important thing and how do they prep me for this and that. And I was lucid, by the way, through the entire thing, which is shocking, because with an ejection fraction of 5 and being in liver, kidney, stomach, and heart failure all at the same time in what they call cardiogenic shock, for me to be lucid and have all the memories of that, it was pretty dramatic. And, my parents had flown in. And so, without getting emotional, the first thing I heard when my parents got there was my dad saying to the doctors, do whatever you need to do to save his life. So it was pretty dramatic. And they told me the choice was either transplant or get an LVAD, left ventricular assist device. And that with a caveat that I wouldn't be strong enough to survive the transplant surgery. And because I'm blood type O, tall and skinny, makes it pretty hard to get a heart. That they recommended an LVAD as a bridge to transplant. And so 4 days later, I had my first open heart surgery, and I got a Thoratec HeartMate 2 LVAD here in Minneapolis, which I had for 40 months. So,
yeah, amazing story, amazing technology. And you point out that ejection fraction, that one number that we often key off of, it tells us about how much blood the heart is pumping with each beat. And a normal, just to give people reference, would be about between 50 and 70%, meaning that the heart empties about 50 to 70% of its volume with each beat. And as you said, you were down at 5%. You can imagine the heart's not pushing much blood, and certainly not enough blood around the body to keep critical processes going at 5%. But as you said, it sounds like you got amazing care, and these left ventricular assist devices can be really critically important bridges, as you said, so we can tune patients up almost, to get them ready for a big operation like a heart transplant. And this is essentially a pump that takes over the pumping function of the heart. Peter, you should talk a little bit maybe about your experience, with some of these newer, like the HeartMate 2, some of these newer devices. You're not tethered to a big machine that you have to drag around, but you do have some extra stuff and wires and things that are coming out of your chest that you have to maintain. You have to keep them clean so that you don't get an infection. We worry about blood clots forming in the tubing, things like that. So talk briefly, if you would, about your experience having a left ventricular assist device, which, again, 40 months, but it got you ready to survive a heart transplant. Is that right?
Yeah, it absolutely did. I'm both the right person and the wrong person to talk about having an LVAD. I had actually written the CEO of Thoratec because I challenged them about their mission. It said, we want to give patients a life. And I said, I don't want a life, I want my life. Yeah. Right. I taught cycle class at the YMCA while I had an LVAD. I did the Minneapolis duathlon twice. I cycled outside. I ran a chainsaw. I did all the things that I wasn't supposed to do. I also went back to work after 60 days. I started traveling. And so I basically wore an external harness like a bra that had two giant batteries on the side and had a kidney bean on the front of me. And I literally had, like an Ethernet cable sticking out of my abdomen. If you were to see me without my shirt on, I have two belly buttons. And that was plugged into this controller that sat in the front of me. And at night, I was either plugged in with batteries or I was plugged into a CPU on the wall. And so for 40 months, I didn't shower. And I literally ran on external power, but it kept me alive. It allowed my heart to recover a little bit, and frankly, for the rest of my body to get healthy enough to withstand that surgery. And I didn't think the LVAD limited my life whatsoever. I thought it was the most amazing thing. I loved traveling it through the airport and getting to talk to people about it. I mean, I'm a salesperson, so there's never a microphone that I don't like, so I really enjoyed the experience, and even being on Coumadin and blood thinners wasn't, problematic for me. I mean, so I can't eat leafy green vegetables. That's fine. I mean, it was fine. And the worst part of the entire experience was the initial surgery when I was so sick, and when they go through getting your anticoagulation right. I mean, there's, it's very common to have blood clots and things like that are pretty uncomfortable and can be severe, but I navigated it for 40 months, and I was completely healthy, when I went into transplant. And in fact, I have my actual LVAD, and when I speak publicly, I'll bring it and I'll pass that, and I'll tell people, you can actually tell somebody that you're actually holding a miracle in your hands, because that thing kept me alive inside my chest for 40 months. My father had an LVAD too, and at one point in time, we were the only father-son LVAD patients in the world. And so he had a HeartMate 3, which was a different, controller and device. And so it was an amazing experience. Not anything I wish on anybody, but I think there's probably certainly worse things in the world to go through than that.
Amazing. Just an incredible story of resilience. I admire you so much. And 40 months in particular, that's a long time to have experience with that. But it sounds like you made the most of that time and then got to your heart transplant. Another amazing miracle of modern medicine, that we can take another individual's heart, put it into you, and really transform your life. And I've seen patients literally who are very, very sick beforehand, maybe not on an LVAD, but very sick. And they get a heart transplant, and within a day or two, they are up and moving around in ways they haven't been able to do for a long time because of their heart failure. Tell us a little bit about what your experience has been post-transplant and how things are going.
Yeah, again, I'm probably the right person and the wrong person to answer this question. I waited 3 weeks for a heart. I got moved from Minneapolis to California, and I went to Cedars-Sinai, and that's the world's largest transplant center. I got a heart in 3 weeks. I was transplanted on July 4th, and there's lots of interesting things that happen to transplant patients. I had served in the 82nd Airborne Division. I'd walked 82 miles in the hallway in Cedars-Sinai. I got my heart on July 4th. Pretty amazing. And I was out of the hospital in 5.5 days, which, again, only because it's fun to talk about. I was the fastest ever discharged from the world's largest transplant center. My experience has been, frankly, nothing short of it's amazing. I'm so thankful that, my donor family in their darkest hour found it within themselves to, to give the gift of life and to go through that. And I remember, I process things intellectually, so I knew what I could expect about denervation, which is one of these concepts about the vagal nerve and the heart being cut and everything. And I'd heard that sometimes there's this phenomena when you wake up, because your new heart tends to be smaller than the old heart, obviously, that you can actually hear like the galloping of the heart in your ears. And I'll never forget waking up after my transplant, my mom having her head 12 inches off my chest, and we could both hear the heart beating audibly, very loud. And if you're a parent, you can hear your kids first, your kids first cry. Like I can hear that, and I can hear this heartbeat. And I could see my radial pulse, like the pulses in my hands and my feet, and I had this color all of a sudden, and it was amazing. And the doctors had said, you're going to feel good every day, 90 days you feel good, but the real aha happens at 6 months. And I think I shared this with Amy. I'll never forget. I was at Lifetime here locally on the treadmill. I was running, and I thought, man, I feel really freaking good. And I looked down at my watch, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's like December 31st. It's almost exactly 6 months since my transplant. And so I've had, knock on wood, I'm as good as my last blood test. I've had zero rejection. I've had no issues. I'm running a half marathon in a week. I did the transplant Olympics in Argentina a couple of years ago. There's an expression that, the other side of the street is awesome. You just got to be willing to get hit by a, Mack truck to get there. And there is some truth. Again, but cardiothoracic surgeons will tell you that the transplant surgery is actually relatively easy. It's just the care of you after and sort of tuning your body. For me, it's been amazing. And my, commitment to myself was to pay it forward, to share that experience with other people, to help other patients. I spend a lot of time between doctors and patients, sharing my story, sort of, helping process and ask questions, because patients don't have strong advocacy. And there's an incredible bond between caregivers and families and transplant patients, that you have this need and this love that sort of comes out of you, that you want to give it to other people and share that experience. And so I definitely try to embrace that.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And obviously, as you've said, the journey after heart transplant doesn't end. That journey continues. So thank you so much for sharing your story. Peter, I wonder if you could share with us, how has the American Heart Association helped you along this journey?
Yeah, I mean, the AHA has been awesome. Aside from, being on my sort of priority giving list, I've also volunteered at a number of functions, whether it's captaining a team or leading some sort of fundraising effort. But I'm also acutely aware of all the research, that the AHA has done, the funding that it provides, the sponsorship, the grants and things. And again, because I'm so connected to this community and I do a lot of board work and I know a lot of the docs, nationally, you know, you want that, you want that research to take place, right? You want people to be pushing sort of the bleeding edge, and thinking about what comes next. And the work that I do professionally, because I'm so close to the docs, like I get calls from my doctors and who actually ask me like, what is Google doing? And how are you thinking about this? And what should we be thinking about? And so in a very ironic way, the world has sort of, come full circle. So the AHA has been a hugely important organization in my life and will be going forward.
Nice. And lots of, patient support groups as well that spin up through the AHA, I'll add. So just to finish, Peter, what does it mean to you that Google's coming together to host an event like the Google Has Heart 5K?
That's a great question. I mean, I think Google is a change the world type of company. I've talked internally on the run up to plan for this, that the summer of my transplant was the summer of the Ice Bucket Challenge, for ALS. And that's, again, a disease that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. And if that can raise hundreds of millions of dollars, and heart disease is the leading cause of death globally, I think it's, starting with Google, and, we're such a mission and purpose driven company with great people. I'm super excited and hopeful that this, we're really laying the foundation for what, would be the start of either a viral campaign or something that we can repeat on an annual basis. It's an incredibly powerful organization, and I'm thankful to be a part of it and play a small part.
Well, again, Peter, thank you for all that you're doing, and thank you for sharing your, incredibly intense story and helping people understand, what the impact of heart disease is. in our lives, and the amazing things we can do to help people through it.
Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I want to change now and talk to Ms. Waldron. Amy, welcome, and thank you for sharing your story. And I know that in a similar way, but this has touched your family, and specifically your daughter Isabella. Tell us a little bit about Isabella, if you would.
Sure, thanks. Isabella is a 17-year-old. She is smart, she's fun, she loves music, plays on her high school golf team, and like most teenagers, loves to hang out with her friends. I get to see a beautiful side of her when she's home and not in the hospital. And in the hospital, like most children that I've seen in the hospital, Isabella is tough as nails. She's incredibly serious. Probably one of the most brave people that I've ever seen in my life, as she has been on this journey for 17 years, really trying to save her life.
I have a 17-year-old daughter, and I have to say this hits home really, really close. Tell us when you first learned that Isabella might have heart problems.
Sure. I found out about Isabella's heart defect a few months before she was born. We were at the ultrasound and they couldn't find her aortic artery. So they did a little bit more testing and they found out that she did not have, her aortic valve never opened. And so those babies are diagnosed as hypoplas left heart syndrome babies. And it's a situation where if she didn't have several repairs, it's a 3 open heart surgery process. When she was born, she would not survive.
Yeah, so maybe if I can, I'll just take a second. Hypoplastic left heart syndrome is a pretty rare congenital heart defect, but a critical one, in that, as you mentioned, if the baby doesn't have a heart repair soon, particularly if it's severe, they will die. And the issue here is that, as I think we all remember from high school anatomy classes, or from health, the heart has 2 sides, and so blood returns to the right side of the heart, and that blood is depleted of oxygen. That gets pumped to the lungs, and the lungs take out waste products like carbon dioxide and put in fresh oxygen. That oxygenated blood then returns to the left side of the heart, where it gets pumped out to the rest of the body, and that circuit then goes around again. So in these babies, the left side of the heart does not develop normally, and often doesn't develop at all. It's very, very small and underdeveloped. Hypoplastic is the medical word for it. And so the right side of the heart really has to take over the entire pump for the whole system, right and left sides. And there are connections between the right and left side that allow this to be okay for often the first few days or perhaps weeks after birth. But once those connections that nature built in close up, as they do as the baby grows, then it becomes a critical issue for the baby, because there's no way to pump blood over to the left side of the body at that point. So for these babies, it's really important to get that surgery, to get it diagnosed, and to get that surgery very early in life, to make sure we start to restore those normal right-left connections, so that deoxygenated blood can flow to the lungs, and that freshly oxygenated blood can then get out to the body, to the brain, to the kidneys, to the other vital organs, so that the baby can grow and thrive. So as you said, the typical sequence is 3 surgeries in the first couple of years of life to kind of get that right heart working, but also taking on the role of the pump and making sure the blood is circulating appropriately. So how did she do through all of those early surgeries?
Yeah, it's been a rough road. Many good years, but definitely many challenging ones. I would say the first challenging decision that we had to make was actually before she was born, and this is where the education and the information that we had received, thankfully, from all the research that had been done before Isabel was born, gave us enough information to make what we consider to be hopefully the right decision. But at this point in time, when they found Isabella's defect, we had to make a decision on whether or not to terminate the pregnancy or to follow through with it. And just from a legal perspective, you really have a short period of time to make a really critical decision. Especially when you have a baby kicking inside of you. It's pretty emotional. And it was probably one of the hardest decisions that I've ever had to make in my life. And so being able to talk to people, being able to read the research and understand that there was a repair, there was a path that could put Isabel in a position to where she could live and live a pretty good life, was critical at a point where we had to make really a life and death decision. So forever grateful for the research and the information that we had access to before we even knew we needed it. And then, it was tough. The next couple of years really were in and out of the hospital. The great thing, and Peter had mentioned this as well, is, you really just have to make the tough decisions and get through the heart surgeries and just have the willingness to fight, to get through the recovery. So a few years of her life, I would say from one to three, were pretty much, in and out of the hospital. And then we were living a great life, or Isabel was living a great life. She, was on the softball team. She was in theater, picked up golf, rode horses, just had a lot of fun. In 7th grade, she started having some breathing challenges and was diagnosed with plastic bronchitis. And plastic bronchitis comes when the pressure in your heart is too high, and it ends up dumping fluid into your lungs, and the fluid starts turning into solids. So, as we went on that journey, we had to go to CHOP, and fortunately, again, because of research, we were able to find the one person in the world who was leading a study to actually intervene and, again, buy us some more time, which really is the theme of Isabel's life, is all these, all of this research has really bought Isabel a tremendous amount of time. So we went through that intervention, and we were good until she hit about 15 years old. And that is when we realized that we were on the path to heart failure and needed to consider a heart transplant.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, you're describing the sort of typical course for these kids who, have those early surgeries, and we can divert the blood flow and kind of put Band-Aids on, but ultimately the right side of the heart that now has to do the pumping, for the left side, isn't designed to kind of do that forever. And so the right side of the heart will fail, even though we've, diverted the blood flow and tried to restore a normal type of circulation. Eventually, that can't work forever. And so transplant is usually the sort of destination here. As you kind of approached that, what were your feelings? What were your thoughts? You already made so many tough decisions, for her and with her, yeah. But I'm sure this was a tough one too.
It's been a long journey. The good thing is when she's going into heart failure, we still could remember all the great years that we had pre-heart failure because of the investment that we had made in the heart surgeries and in the lung procedure. So we had a sense that we have to get through yet another barrier, and we'll hopefully, see those better days. So Isabella was a huge advocate of having the heart transplant. From my perspective, I would have held off for years. It's a really scary thing for a parent to have to go through. So I was dreading it, and she was looking forward to it. She really felt the impact. It was hard for her to breathe. All of a sudden, her body, she was waking up with pain every day. Mm. And really, it was a struggle to get up every day and go to school. And the one good thing of COVID for us was that she could stay home and she could learn from home. So being able to do remote learning during COVID was tremendously helpful for her because she didn't have to extend the energy. And so we spent pretty much most of, I would say, 15 and 16-year-old time frame for her was experiencing the decline from heart failure. And then about 6 or 7 months before she turned 17, we moved into Lurie Children's Hospital because she could no longer survive outside of the hospital without medication to keep her heart functioning. And then we began our journey of calling the hospital home for a while.
My home institution here at Northwestern, right here in Chicago. And so glad to hear that, they were able to care for Isabella. But she sounds amazing, and obviously incredibly strong, having been through all this. So what happened with the transplant?
So we had a little stumble in the transplant. So the first time they called us, we were super nervous, excited. They usually let you know about 24 hours beforehand or a little bit less. And we were all ready. Isabel went in, and unfortunately there was a problem with the size of the heart. So kind of mid-procedure, for better or worse, they had to sew her up and bring her back. And I just remember Isabella waking up with tears because she could hear, even though she wasn't awake, she could hear the fact that she didn't get this first heart. So it was emotionally a really challenging time. It took her about a week to really mentally get over the fact that, she didn't come out with her heart. And about 4 weeks later, we got the call again, and the doctors were a little nervous telling her this time, given our first experience. But we knew it was right, and we knew waiting was the right thing. And so she was incredibly brave. She had her brother come over. They played board games. They had fun. They listened to a playlist, and she was ready. She was really ready. So she went in for her procedure. It was about an 11-hour surgery. It's very long, very complicated. And it took her about 24 hours to recover. They did put her out a little bit longer so that her body could adjust from all of the medication and surgery during that downtime. And then about 24 to 36 hours later, her eyes were open, and we just knew she was going to be okay.
Just incredible. And, 11 hours, not the typical length of a heart transplant surgery. As Peter was saying, those are actually pretty straightforward operations, except for these kids who've had a number of repairs for congenital operations. And so, yeah, a really long, tough operation, and obviously hard on her. But so many reasons why it's good to be young. The young patients tend to bounce back more quickly, no question about it. So how has life been since the transplant? How's she doing?
Well, we have not hit the 6-month hurrah moment that Peter has mentioned. It's been hard. It's been really, really hard. We are 4 months in post-transplant, and Isabella's had tremendous rejection. So she, in addition to the heart, the normal heart meds, Isabella's had to go through 3 different types of chemotherapy to fight the rejection. Fingers crossed. The good news is that we are now 2 tests out where she has, there have been no detection of rejection. So all the treatments, fortunately, have gotten us to where we are today. That in itself is incredible. The fact that they can take some blood samples and identify where the rejection is coming from, what cells need to be attacked, and they specifically can get the medication that is needed to go after those cells. It just seems like a miracle. I know it's research, but it seems like a miracle, all that we know today with regards to being able to keep people here and alive. So we are 4 months in, we have no rejection, and Isabella is just starting to rebuild her strength. So right now we are getting that positive outlook of life coming back to us and coming back to normal, hopefully very soon.
Well, again, what an amazing story of resilience. And you point out, you're right, that this is just unbelievable science that has unfolded over decades. People think, oh, you get a heart transplant, that's the end of the story. But of course, it's not. This is foreign tissue, and your body is designed to reject anything that is foreign because it might be an infection, or it might be something that clearly doesn't belong. And so the immune system revs up pretty substantially to try to say, this doesn't belong here, I'm going to attack it and kill it. And it's just amazing that we've learned how to manipulate the immune system just enough to suppress the rejection, but not so much that leaves people wide open for other infections and other things that the immune system needs to be doing for us. So it's a very delicate balance. But I'm so pleased to hear that she's kind of got to the place where it sounds like they've gotten things right, and now the heart can help her move forward. So that's really amazing, and what an incredible story. Let me ask you what I asked Peter. How has the Heart Association helped you through this journey?
The American Heart Association has helped us in so many ways. First of all, the research that was there when we needed it, we had to make a really tough decision, was just invaluable. In addition to that, Isabella has been touched by hundreds of clinicians throughout her life. They are all trying to do research to advance the success of these heart procedures, and the American Heart Association is funding so many of them. So even though they may not be impacting us today, I know it's going to help us and so many other people in the future live much better lives.
Oh, thanks for putting it that way. I mean, I don't think anybody could say it any better. It's exactly right, and it's such a critical core mission of the American Heart Association. So I'll ask you the same question I asked Mr. Quimby as well. What does it mean to you that Google's coming together to sponsor an event like the Google Has Heart 5K to support the mission of the AHA?
I'm incredibly proud that Google's supporting the 5K. It really aligns so much with what I believe in and what the people that we work with believe in. This is a big problem. It needs a solution. This is what Google does. We support, creating solutions. We also support doing what needs to be done in order to help people live better, healthier lives. So for me, it just makes sense. It's what we do, and it just makes me incredibly proud. Something that I think is really invaluable is that, heart health is critical to everybody. And whether or not it's something that impacts you as you're dealing with prenatal issues, early childhood issues, or any health issues throughout the rest of your life, this is an issue that will affect each and every one of us, whether it's ourselves, our family members, our community. So if it's not touching you now, I promise you it will. This is a problem that we all need to come together and help solve so that we can have healthier, better communities and the gift of time with our loved ones.
That was so beautifully said. And again, not sure I could make a better statement for what the American Heart Association is about. I want to thank both of you, Ms. Walter and Mr. Quimby, for sharing your stories and your incredible journeys, which are not over. And thankfully, they're not over. And again, I'm so pleased to hear that the Heart Association has contributed through its research, through its patient support, through its connections, and through the work that we're doing in communities to help you on your journey, but help you spread the word about how important heart disease is, how important heart issues are to all of our lives and all of our families. And just to kind of think about that, remember that even in this year of a pandemic, when, in the first year of COVID-19, when about 500,000 people died from the virus, remember that 850,000 people were dying of heart disease and stroke, the number one causes of death, both in this country and around the globe. This is what the American Heart Association is trying to combat, is every single year for the last century, heart disease and stroke have been the leading causes of death, even in a year when there's a pandemic. And so, we have an amazing foe, and we have so many tools in our toolbox that we can use to combat it. And it starts right at the beginning of life, when we can try to launch our children into healthier trajectories, helping them learn about heart healthy diets, about the importance of physical activity, about getting with their doctor and knowing their numbers from early in life so that they know about monitoring blood pressure. They know the importance of cholesterol. They know the importance of trying to maintain a healthy weight, even in this society where we're doing our best to undermine that, unfortunately. And they know about the risks of diabetes and doing everything they can to avoid those risk factors that can develop along the way. But also, as we've heard here today, the importance of knowing your family's medical history, so that if there might be reasons to be concerned about genetic factors that could influence your heart health, or if there might be the ability to screen prenatally for a congenital heart defect, it's just so important to understand that family history and put it in the context of everything else. And this is really what the American Heart Association is all about, is helping every person across the life course live their best life and achieve their best heart health. And so, I hope you've heard these messages of hope and just amazing resilience. There are so many tools in the toolbox that we can help people with. And, the American Heart Association is touching much more of our lives than I think people realize. We've heard a lot today about the research that's been funded by the American Heart Association. I'm so proud to say that in the last really now 7 decades, the American Heart Association has funded over $5 billion in cardiovascular research that has made possible things like heart transplant, things like stents to open blocked coronary arteries, things like some of the things we heard of managing the immune system for patients after a heart transplant. That research continues every single day, and the American Heart Association performs a critical role kind of filling the gaps for those young investigators who aren't yet sort of deemed worthy of federal funding, but really are driving the field forward, as Peter said, at the bleeding edge of research and our understanding of science. But the American Heart Association is also advocating at the federal, state, and local level for healthier meals in schools, a healthier food supply for all of us, physical activity, safe places and safe spaces for people to be able to participate in physical activity, and all sorts of screening programs to make sure we can identify congenital heart defects as early as possible and get patients like Isabella, into care pathways so that they can live their best lives. And finally, the AHA is in over 10,000 schools in our country, teaching volunteerism, teaching heart health, and yes, using those opportunities to raise some money to support our life-saving mission. So, when you think about all that, the AHA is a $1 billion a year organization entirely focused on the public's health and especially on the public's heart health. So, what that says to me is what Google is doing through this Google Has Heart 5K is just so critically important. And you all know that without a margin, without fundraising, there is no mission. We won't be able to accomplish what we need to accomplish. So I just want to express, my deep, deep gratitude to Google, to all of you, but especially to Ms. Walder and Mr. Quimby for driving this Google Has Heart 5K to help support the mission of the American Heart Association so that all of us can live healthier, longer lives. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think you've been inspired by the stories we've heard today. I hope that if that drives you or inspires you to make a donation, that you'll stay tuned. We're going to give you information about how you can participate in the Google Has Heart 5K or just donate to the American Heart Association. So please consider that. Please be safe, and thank you so much for joining us today.